There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has no name in any language Paulson knew. Not the exhaustion of physical labor, the honest, clean tiredness of a body that has been used well and needs rest. Not even the exhaustion of long hours, which at least carries the dignity of effort. This was something else. Something that arrived after hours of staring at work that refused to move. After a mind that had been running at full speed in every direction simultaneously and arriving nowhere. After the specific, demoralizing experience of being completely unable to do the thing you are entirely capable of doing, not because the skill was gone, but because the instrument that held the skill had quietly seized up without warning. Creatives know this feeling better than most. It does not announce itself with a dramatic collapse. It arrives gradually, a sentence that resists being written, an edit that refuses to resolve, a decision that should take 30 seconds and takes 3 hours. The cursor blinks. The timeline sits unchanged. The brain that has produced good work before sits in front of the same tools and produces nothing, and the longer it produces nothing, the more convinced it becomes that nothing is all it has left. Paulson had been living in this state for longer than he was prepared to admit. And then, at 3 in the morning on a night that should have broken him, he stumbled onto something so simple it felt almost embarrassing. A reset so small and so accessible that the only reason he had not found it sooner was that he had been looking for solutions that matched the size of the problem rather than solutions that actually worked. Stay with us because today we are telling the story of Paulson, a creative professional who discovered that the brain is not a machine to be pushed harder when it stops working. It is a landscape to be tended. And what he learned in 2 minutes on a sleepless night that changed the way he worked for good. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe, because somebody out there needs to hear exactly this today. Paulson was 33 years old and had built his creative career on the dangerous foundation of being able to outwork everyone around him. It had served him for years. In his mid-20s, when he was establishing himself as a video editor and content creator, the ability to work longer and harder than his competitors had been a genuine competitive advantage. He took the projects nobody else wanted because of the hours involved. He delivered when other people missed deadlines. He had trained himself to function on 5 hours of sleep and treat rest as an optional luxury rather than a biological requirement. And for a while the work had validated this approach by being good, reliably, consistently good in ways that built a reputation and then a client list, and then a career that was, by the time he was 33, genuinely sustaining. But the foundation had always been cracked. You can outwork your limits for a season, sometimes for several seasons. But the limits do not disappear because you ignore them. They accumulate quietly, invisibly, in the form of a cognitive bank account that is being withdrawn from faster than it is being replenished. And eventually, without dramatic announcement, the account runs low, then lower. Then one night you sit in front of work you know how to do, and your brain simply will not cooperate. Not because you have become less capable, but because the instrument of your capability has been run without maintenance for so long that it has stopped responding to the commands you are giving it. This was the state Paulson found himself in on a Tuesday night in November. He had a project due, a short documentary piece for a client he valued, the kind of work that required not just technical competence but genuine creative engagement. The script needed to be finished. The editing timeline, already assembled in its rough form, needed the careful attention that turned adequate cuts into something that actually moved people. These were things Paulson had done hundreds of times. Things he was genuinely excellent at. At 3 in the morning, he had been staring at the same paragraph of script for 45 minutes and written nothing. The monitors cast their blue light across a desk that had become the geography of his stagnation. Coffee cups from 3 different hours. Notes that had stopped making sense. A timeline on his right screen that seemed to be mocking him with its incompleteness. Outside his window, the city was doing what cities do at 3 in the morning. The hum of distant traffic, the occasional wail of a siren, the mechanical hiss of a neighbor's heating system cycling on and off. Each sound landed on a brain that had no more capacity to absorb and process without cost. He was not stuck because the work was too hard. He was stuck because his brain was full. Not full of useful things, full of the particular kind of mental noise that accumulates when a creative person has been pushing without rest for too long. The 100 tabs open feeling that anyone who works with their mind knows intimately, where every tab is demanding attention simultaneously, and the system has slowed to the point where nothing can load properly, and the solution everyone reaches for is to push harder, which is exactly the wrong solution because pushing harder on a frozen system does not unfreeze it. It makes it worse. Paulson reached for his headphones. He was not going to put on music. He knew from experience that music with lyrics or strong melody would add another layer of cognitive demand, rather than removing one. What he pulled up instead was something he had bookmarked weeks earlier and never used, a high-fidelity recording of a thunderstorm moving through a cedar forest. Rain on leaves. The low, unhurried rumble of distant thunder. The sound of weather happening at a scale that had nothing to do with deadlines or timelines or the paragraph that would not cooperate. The effect was not subtle. Within minutes the urban static, the sirens and the hum and the heating system, had been replaced by something that the brain processed entirely differently. Hard sounds, the kind produced by machinery and human activity, demand a form of low-level vigilance that the nervous system cannot fully switch off. They require constant unconscious monitoring. Soft sounds, rain, wind, water moving over stone, carry no such demand. They do not need to be assessed for threat or meaning. They simply exist, and the brain, encountering them, is allowed to release the vigilance it had been maintaining without knowing it was maintaining it. For the first time in hours, Paulson could hear himself think. But the script was still a mess. The thinking that had become audible was still the wrong kind of thinking, overthought, overcrowded, every word examined too closely to be used. He recognized this too. The problem was not the soundscape, but the state of his directed attention, the focused, effortful cognitive resource that had been engaged without pause for so long that it had simply run out. He remembered something he had read once about a concept called soft fascination. The idea that certain kinds of visual engagement, gentle, effortless, requiring no analysis or decision-making, allowed the directed attention system to go offline temporarily while the rest of the brain continued its quieter, more associative processing. The kind of processing that produced solutions not by forcing them, but by creating the conditions in which they could surface on their own. He minimized the script. He did not open social media. He understood instinctively that social media was the opposite of what he needed. Every scroll added cache rather than clearing it. Each image and caption and notification, a small demand on the same attention system that was already depleted. What he opened instead was a 2-minute clip he had saved from a drone shoot over a mountain range, slow, unhurried footage of sunlight moving across snow-capped peaks, the camera drifting through valleys and along ridgelines with the patient, purposeless grace of something that had nowhere it needed to be. He did not analyze the footage. He was an editor. Analysis was his default mode, the professional reflex that wanted to assess every cut, every movement, every compositional choice. He consciously released that reflex and simply watched, let his eyes follow the crags and the shadows and the light on the snow without asking anything of what he was seeing. 2 minutes. When the clip ended, Paulson sat for a moment in the particular quality of quiet that follows something genuinely restful, and then he looked back at the script. He saw immediately the sentence that needed to be deleted, not after analysis, not after effort. It was simply visible in a way it had not been visible 45 minutes ago, obvious, almost laughably so, the kind of thing that is only invisible when you are too close and becomes immediately apparent the moment you create any distance at all. He deleted it. The paragraph resolved. The next one followed, but he did not return to the old pattern of pushing through. He had learned something in those 2 minutes that he wanted to test further, The idea that the brain working on creative problems is not best served by being driven harder toward the solution, but by being given the conditions in which the solution can arrive on its own. He made one more change to his setup. He moved his research notes to his laptop and dedicated his secondary monitor, the one that had been showing the editing timeline, to a slow looping video of ocean waves meeting a rocky shore. Not dramatic surf, just the steady, rhythmic arrival and retreat of water against stone. Something that provided a visual anchor for the moments when he needed to look away from the primary work and think, replacing the blank wall or the cluttered desk he would otherwise have been staring at with something that kept the background of his attention gently, effortlessly engaged without demanding anything of the foreground. The effect on the next 4 hours of work was unlike anything he had experienced in years of pushing through, not because he worked faster in the conventional sense, but because the work flowed with a consistency and a quality that the pushed, depleted, 3 a.m. version of himself could never have produced. The decisions that usually required agonizing, the cut that either worked or did not, the line of narration that needed to land precisely or undermine the whole sequence, arrived with a clarity that felt almost effortless. Not because they were easy, because the instrument making them was no longer running on empty. By sunrise, the project was finished. Not just finished in the sense of complete. Finished in the sense of good, the kind of good that Paulson could assess with the honest eye of someone who knew the difference between work that had been forced to a conclusion and work that had actually arrived somewhere worth going. He sat in the early light and looked at what he had made. He was tired. But it was the clean tiredness of a body that had worked well and needed rest, not the hollow, depleted exhaustion of someone who had fought their own brain for hours and lost. He had not just finished the project. He had finished it without leaving himself as wreckage on the other side of it. He slept for 6 hours and woke up thinking about everything he wanted to change about how he worked. The thunderstorm recording became a permanent fixture of his work sessions. Not always, but reliably on the days when the environment was loud and the attention was already fragmented. The 2-minute nature reset became a tool he reached for not as a last resort at 3 in the morning, but as a deliberate, scheduled interruption. Every 90 minutes, a brief and genuine withdrawal of directed attention followed by a return that was consistently sharper than the one before it. The secondary monitor evolved into a considered choice rather than a default. Sometimes the ocean, sometimes a forest, sometimes simply a window he had not been sitting close enough to use. His output did not increase dramatically in quantity, but it increased significantly in quality. And the hours he spent producing it stopped feeling like a siege he was conducting against his own reluctant brain and started feeling, more often than not, like the work he had originally wanted to do when he chose this life, challenging, absorbing, satisfying in the way that only things made with a full and present mind can be satisfying. He had not found a shortcut. He had found something better, an understanding of how the instrument actually worked. And once you understand how an instrument works, you stop fighting it and start playing it. The brain is not a machine. This is the lie that creative exhaustion is built on, the assumption that more input produces more output, that pushing harder through resistance is always the correct response, that rest and recovery are things you earn after the work is done rather than conditions the work requires in order to be done well. The brain is a landscape. It has weather. It has seasons. It has conditions under which it produces abundantly and conditions under which it produces nothing, and the difference between those conditions is not always effort. Sometimes it is environment. Sometimes it is the quality of sound surrounding a mind trying to focus. Sometimes it is 2 minutes of snow-capped mountains and the willingness to let the directed attention go completely offline long enough for the solution to surface on its own. The creative professionals who sustain their best work over years and decades are not the ones who push hardest. They are the ones who learn to read the instrument, to recognize when it needs to be played, and when it needs to rest, when to drive toward the solution, and when to create the conditions in which the solution can arrive without being driven. Paulson spent years treating his brain like a machine he could run indefinitely at full capacity. 2 minutes of drone footage over a mountain range at 3 in the morning showed him it was something else entirely. You do not need more hours. You do not need more caffeine. You do not need to push through the frozen screen until something cracks. You need 2 minutes. A cedar forest in the rain. The patient arrival of ocean waves against stone. You need to give the instrument what it needs, and then trust it to do what it was built to do. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.